With the 80th anniversary of D-Day on the horizon, it seemed appropriate to take a look at a strategy game that didn't just feature the initial landing, but put its focus squarely on the Battle of Normandy. Hi, I'm Calvin, and today we're going to take a look at the excellent single-player campaign that was included with the original Company of Heroes, what made it great, and make a few comments on its historical accuracy. For those who aren't familiar with it, Company of Heroes was released in 2006. It was created by Relic Entertainment and published by THQ. Relic are no stranger to RTS. They'd previously produced the outstanding Homeworld and Dawn of War. It's rare for a studio to create one excellent RTS series, let alone two, but with Company of Heroes they managed it a third time, something that I don't think's been achieved before or replicated since. The game was received really well by everyone. It had review scores well into the 90s and Game of the Year awards from a whole host of publications. It sold millions of copies and even inspired a direct-to-video film of the same name, which is pretty rubbish, but it still feels worth mentioning. Relic built the thing on their brand new game engine, which included the Havoc physics engine, so it looked and felt great, and it featured a really strong multiplayer offering as well. However, we're not here to talk about any of that today. We're here to take an in-depth look at the single-player campaign and what made it so enjoyable. The first act opens really strong with a scene that anyone who's watched Saving Private Ryan will immediately recognise. American GIs are packed like sardines into landing craft, crashing through the rough waves as they head towards Omaha Beach. Things are exploding all over the place and many young soldiers are cut down by machine gun fire before they even get a foot on dry land. It's a brutal scene, but one that's well presented and makes you want to immediately take control so you can start to silence those guns. Thankfully, you don't have to wait long, and after a couple of minutes the pre-rendered cutscene seamlessly transitions into the game engine, and you're given the task of getting soldiers up to the shingle and blowing a hole through the barbed wire barricade. The opening scene somehow manages to strike a perfect balance between the urgency of the situation in front of you and the low difficulty level of a first mission. I'm not sure if it's even possible to actually fail, or if it just keeps giving you as many squads as you need, but either way you're given a set of objectives and plenty of time to figure out how to move your units around and use their abilities. You're not told exactly where to go or what to click, but you are given little pointers along the way, and from the first minute you feel like you're in total control. What I mean by that is you feel like you're actually playing the game rather than just watching it. You might not necessarily feel that victory itself is a difficult task, but you do feel that your execution of the attack has a direct correlation with the number of casualties you take. The number of soldiers you lose isn't tracked anywhere, there's no achievements for it, but the opening intro is powerful and compelling enough that you still care. Now that you've had a chance to get a feel for your units in the chaos of the initial beach landing, the clock is rewound slightly and you're placed in command of some paratroopers dropped behind the lines in the very early hours of the morning. This second mission is a great follow-up and teaches you about victory points, weapon teams and fixed defences. It starts small and simple. Your paratroopers sneak around the Normandy hedgerows, taking out AA guns and ambushing a convoy. Unlike the first mission where you have almost limitless waves of troops, the second mission requires you to be far more careful, but gives you a reasonably large area to operate in. It's still not too difficult, but you get a great feeling of agency, and successfully progressing through the objectives with minimal losses is particularly rewarding. Once that's wrapped up, you proceed into Carentan, the town at the heart of the third and fourth missions. Your airborne forces must first clear out the centre and establish a barracks, where you're given your first introduction to a unit producing structure. You're also given plenty of time to get to grips with using mortars and satchel charges to remove entrenched infantry from buildings. Once you've secured the town, your job is to hold off the inevitable counter-attack. Holding the line against a number of enemy waves is a real staple of RTS missions, and this one doesn't disappoint. By this point in the game you're familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of your units, you know how to use weapon platforms, and you're quite competent at blowing stuff up. This is where the game and its physics engine really start to excel, and halting the enemy advance is a pretty impressive spectacle as shells rain down, buildings collapse, and vehicles go careening off the road before exploding with a satisfying boom. Now that Carentan is clear and the two American beaches are linked, the second act sees the US Army make a push to capture the point of Cherbourg to secure the western flank. This is where the game really starts to open up and you're introduced to base building and the finer points of resource management. It's really satisfying to arrive at this point. Infantry work's been a lot of fun, but vehicles are implemented so well in this game they're a real joy to use, and it's really exciting when you first see them available in the build menu. There isn't a huge selection of them initially, but each of them excels at a particular role, so you generally want to build and use all of them. Drip feeding the player additional units and abilities during the single player campaign is standard RTS practice, and Company of Heroes does it effortlessly. They all feel highly appropriate to the situation that you're currently facing, and nothing feels out of place. However, this escalation isn't quite linear, and to keep things a little varied, the 8th mission puts you back in control of the airborne company on a commando style raid to knock out a V2 launch site. The 3rd act follows Able Company as they push south to St. Lo and then on to Mortain. Your available pool of arms and armour is already almost complete at this point, but there are still a few tasty new morsels sprinkled in, such as the Calliope rocket tank. At this point in the game, the missions really start to increase in scope, and rather than assaulting a small section of a town or holding a bridge, you're instead tasked with operating over a wide area with sizable forces. These missions are a little more like skirmish matches, and generally have a slow start as you secure your initial resource points and build your forces, before making a big push on the enemy base of operations. However, the campaign likes to keep you on your toes, and Mission 12 has you attempting to hold out for 30 furious minutes as wave upon wave of hardened assault troops makes a beeline for your base. It's a fun challenge as you have to be particularly cunning with the deployment of your forces, or you'll be overrun before the clock runs out. After the mayhem at the end of the last mission, you're thrown right back in the deep end as you move into the final act. The Mortain counterattack is a brutal victory point based contest that takes some beating, and like the other 4 missions that finish up the campaign, is a worthy challenge, especially on the harder difficulty settings. There is still a little bit more variety introduced, including a couple more vehicles like the M10 tank destroyer and the Pershing heavy tank, as well as a tank focused penultimate mission that has you hunting down a tiger race. The campaign is concluded in style, with a large multi-faceted mission where you're tasked with closing the Felice pocket and bringing about the destruction of Army Group B. With this complete, the campaign comes to a satisfying conclusion, as the last of the serious enemy opposition are defeated and the Allies can start their long march towards Germany. The first thing that makes this campaign so satisfying is the excellence of the game engine. This might be a bit of an obvious point, but I think it's one worth making, as it shows that the very heart of a good single player campaign is a solid frame to hang all of the necessary elements against. As well as a good number of highly varied units, it's all very easy to control and it's generally a real joy to experience. Graphically it's excellent, and even though it was released 18 years ago, I think it holds up exceptionally well even by today's standards. The look and feel is really enhanced by the sound design, which is superbly done. Each individual weapon's sound or unit response is not only easily identifiable, but it's also authentic, rich and totally suitable for the setting. The mix of pre-rendered, in-game and animated cutscenes combined with the narration does a great job of telling the story. I never feel the need to skip or gloss over the pre-mission introduction, and I think combined with the mission briefings it's really easy to follow and understand what you're supposed to do and why you're supposed to be doing it. They don't delve too deep into individual characters, and Private Johnny Hopeful isn't killed off in a long, predictable wide shot every 15 minutes. There's no huge surprises or awkward plot twists, just the experiences of a couple of companies well told through the voices of their officers and NCOs. The story is surprisingly and thankfully quite muted and respectful. Victory and survival itself is celebrated, but the broken bodies of the enemy are not. The nice thing about telling the story this way is it feels part of the game rather than just something that runs alongside it, and it works really well for an RTS based on real events. I think the campaign's greatest success is the pacing, and much like a good album, it feels like a collection of items that are designed to be experienced together in one particular order. It opens fast but simple, and then starts to slow down as things become more complicated before gradually ramping up in both scope and difficulty, while occasionally giving you a chance to breathe with a lower intensity mission or two just when you need it. Tactics, abilities and units are introduced at a steady pace throughout the campaign, so each new mission brings you something new and exciting to play with. Once you've had time to get comfortable with all of the tools at your disposal, and had some time to learn the kind of roadblocks and counterattacks your opponent will use against you, the final few missions present you with real challenges that are not just difficult to overcome, but also extremely satisfying to do so. If you're a fan of military history, which I don't think is a totally unreasonable assumption given the game's subject matter, it's extremely rewarding to see that a half-decent level of research has been undertaken to be respectful to the source material. The characters within the game are fictional, as are the exact particulars of their individual roles in the fighting, but each of the campaign's missions are at least representative of the battle for Normandy. The US Army did storm Omaha Beach on the morning of D-Day, and the 101st Airborne did drop during the night before. There were battles over Carentan, Cherbourg, Hill 192, and in all of the places that are featured in the 15 missions that make up the campaign, and there was a V2 facility at Sottevast. The battle for Normandy did pretty much come to a conclusion with the closing of the Falaise Pocket, and as far as I can tell with my limited understanding, everything depicted in the game happens at about the right place in the timeline. I'm far from an expert, so I'm sure there are plenty of smaller details they got wrong, but generally the game seems to feature period-accurate soldiers using period-accurate weapons, tanks, vehicles and artillery. I remember back in 2006 when I first played this that I just couldn't believe that the Calliope, Goliath or Crabflower were anything but invented for this game, and that I was pleasantly surprised to find out that all of these not only existed on paper, but they were actually produced, deployed and used in numbers. All in, I think that the Company of Heroes single player campaign is probably one of the best story campaigns that RTS has to offer. It's nothing like Command & Conquer, Red Alert, Warcraft, Starcraft or Age of Empires. It doesn't try to copy their success or emulate them in any way, but instead it does its own thing and it succeeds in all the right areas. It's both exciting and engaging, while also giving you a lot of agency and really lets you take your time and have fun with it. It doesn't have any choices for you to make between missions, nor is there a strategic layer for you to interact with, and it just doesn't need them. Like a great album, it's confident enough in its content that you can just press play and enjoy each track in order, just as the artist intended. Hi there! Thanks for sitting through my little Company of Heroes presentation. If you've got anything to add, please leave me a comment, as it's nice to have something to read with my morning coffee. And if you enjoyed this video, then please click the like button. If you want to get in touch for some reason, you can visit me on my Discord that's linked in the description, and if you want more of this sort of thing, then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.